In 1931, the League of Nations arranged for an exchange of letters between persons of prominence of the day to promote discussion of its concerns. One of the first to be approached was the eminent physicist Albert Einstein. The person he, in turn, chose to correspond with was the creator of the treatment of psychoanalysis, a neurologist by the name of Dr. Sigmund Freud. Although the building of the atomic bomb was still some years away, Einstein had already discovered the science that would make it possible. He believed that Freud could shed light on a question that seems the most insistent of all the problems that civilization has to face. And so it was that in 1932, the scientist who would redefine for 20th century humanity its understanding of the physical world, posed the following question to the physician who would change its perception of the psychological one. Is there any way of delivering mankind from the menace of war? It is common knowledge that modern science has come to mean a matter of life or death for civilization as we know it. There are no greater threats to the health of humanity than nuclear weapons and climate change, threats that paradoxically arise from human behavior. Nuclear weapons arise out of the human proclivity for war, and climate change from our troubled relationship to the natural world. From an evolutionary perspective, both are attempts at survival and adaptation that have gone absurdly awry. Nuclear weapons were conceived in lies, and they have lived off them ever since. From their inception and the flawed reasoning of their birth, nuclear weapons have thrived on an Orwellian logic that has driven and continued to drive the arms race. Underpinning this logic, underneath the convoluted contortions of the cortex of the brain, are its ravenous primate appetites. And although the generals and the statesmen speak in hushed tones, their serious purpose illustrated with charts, diagrams, and maps, underneath the uniform and the suit are the body and brain of an ape. J. Robert Oppenheimer was the scientist who engineered the bomb, the man who was able to take the embryonic field of nuclear physics from theory to product. Within the life of Oppenheimer, we will see illustrated at the individual and collective level the paradoxes of the human condition and its inherent capacity to lie to itself. At the turn of the century, on April 22, 1904, J. Robert Oppenheimer was born into the Jewish immigrant dream of America. His father, Julius, was a Jew who, at the age of 17, followed an older brother to New York City from Germany. Before Robert's birth, Julius had established himself as a successful businessman and a collector of fine art. Robert's parents doted on their two sons, Robert and his younger brother Frank, and lavished upon them all the opportunities and enrichment money could buy, from a progressive Jewish private school education to their own sailboat. It was a family that did not deny its Jewish roots, but very much wanted acceptance by the American elite. Young Robert grew into a bookish, socially awkward, unathletic boy who pursued solitary intellectual pursuits, such as rock collecting. This left him open to the teasing and ostracism of the other boys, whose acceptance he longed for. As he moved into his adolescence, Robert revealed a reckless side, taking great risks as a sailor, counterphobically driven by his own impulsive nature and a need to prove his athletic, manly acumen. This side of him further developed when he was taken on a trip at the age of 18, at the urging of his father, to New Mexico by Herbert Smith, a Gentile teacher from his private school. On this trip, he met Catherine Page, a beautiful Gentile woman 10 years his senior, who ran a dude ranch. For the first time, Robert began to see himself as a sexual male and embraced America's iconic imagery of the warrior, the Western cowboy. The cowboy is an image that was created by Jewish immigrants. Most of the major film producers of early Hollywood were Jews who had originally lived within 500 miles of each other in Eastern Europe. Through cinema, they held up to Christian America a mirror it fell in love with. It was later used to great effect by American political figures, including Ronald Reagan and George Bush Jr. The cowboy, based on itinerant, illiterate, heavy-drinking farm workers, was transformed into a tight-lipped, cool, but righteous loner who killed people, but only when he had to, which turned out to be most of the time. While riding his horse through the New Mexico desert, Robert came up upon a breathtaking valley. It was one he would return to time and time again, and would eventually become the birthplace of the atomic bomb, Los Alamos. Oppenheimer did his postgraduate studies in nuclear physics in Germany with Max Born. He was drawn to Born's ideas about pacifism and, with double irony, formed friendships with other doctoral students in the nuclear physics program who would later work on the Nazis' failed atomic bomb project. After his studies, Oppenheimer was hired by the physics department at Caltech in California, which he chose in large part because of its proximity to the Los Alamos Valley. At the University of California at Berkeley, Oppenheimer studied Sanskrit, an ancient Hindu text, whose philosophy celebrated the here and now of work, duty, and discipline, but urged one not to think too hard about their consequences. It was from these texts that he was to take his famous quote regarding the first successful explosion of a nuclear bomb. By the mid-30s, Oppenheimer was able to attract young graduate students to Berkeley. However, if the candidates were Jewish, he found himself bumping into the brick wall of anti-Semitism. As Berkeley University President Bing said, one Jew in the department was enough. So Robert learned that although he was now inside the gate, he was by no means secure, that one's position was precarious, and without proper care, he too could end up outside the wall. Romance, however, was also to come his way at this time. He fell in love with Jean Tatlock, a beautiful but brooding Gentile intellectual, and her interests in English literature and left-wing progressive social causes. It was through Jean's interest in English literature that Oppenheimer took the name Trinity for the first nuclear bomb test. It came from a line written by the classical English Christian poet John Donne, "Batter my heart, three-personed God." Although much is being made today of the Islamic bomb, nuclear weapons were first christened by Christianity. However, the relationship with Jean Tatlock ended, and Robert went on to meet and eventually marry Katie Harrison. Katie, like Jean, came from an affluent Gentile background, but had a much more aggressive nature, being socially ambitious and known for a volatile temper. For their wedding, Robert bought his new bride a Cadillac, a new incarnation of the American dream, in which the cowboy now became a family man, sitting behind the wheel of a powerful, luxurious machine. With prescient irony, the newlyweds nicknamed their toy Bombsight. On July 29, 1939, news arrived that two German scientists had successfully split a uranium nucleus. Oppenheimer immediately grasped the implications of the experiment. "A uranium deuteride might very well blow itself to hell," he wrote a colleague. In August 1939, Leo Szilard, who feared that the Nazis were trying to build an atomic weapon, organized a group of fellow physicists in the United States, including Albert Einstein, to sign a letter to President Roosevelt, urging him to look into developing an American one.
There was, in reality, no clear proof from intelligence sources that the Nazis were making significant progress on this project. In fact, at the time of the Nazi surrender, it was revealed that they were far from completing an atomic bomb.
Roosevelt, however, did follow through and set up the S-1 committee, to which the eager Oppenheimer was appointed director. He was given the title of Coordinator of Rapid Rapture, the title an admixture of Christianity and eroticism. Oppenheimer quickly went about recruiting scientists for this group, including his later nemesis, Edward Teller. Teller would develop a rivalry with Oppenheimer over Teller's ambition to build the H-bomb, the next generation of larger atomic weapons, and later plant in the ear of the already dementing Ronald Reagan the idea of outer space nuclear warfare, known today as Star Wars. Oppenheimer quickly transformed himself from theoretical scientist to engineer, procuring the large, expensive industrial plants required to produce weapons-grade uranium. He severed his remaining left-wing connections, claiming he wanted nothing to interfere with his usefulness to the nation because only an atomic bomb will dislodge Hitler from Europe. Around this time, an incident occurred at Oppenheimer's home that became known as the Chevalier Affair and would later come back to haunt him. Chevalier, a friend known to Oppenheimer through his leftist sympathies, approached him one evening to ask on behalf of a mutual friend whether Oppenheimer would pass on information to one of America's allies, the Soviets. Russia, at this point, was under attack from Germany. Although there are no witnesses, Oppenheimer apparently refused to participate, but the moment became a fault line through which his enemies would drive a stake to crucify him. As the project grew in size and security concerns, it outgrew the radiation lab at Berkeley, and a new home had to be found, one that was remote and isolated. A search began in the adjacent Southwest deserts. Oppenheimer suggested his beloved valley, Los Alamos. The site was selected for the first nuclear bomb lab in the world and continues as such to this day. Oppenheimer proved to be a successful and charismatic director, motivating his scientific charges through his enthusiastic leadership. His military counterpart was General Leslie Groves. In contrast to the frail athlete Oppenheimer, Groves was a military man in every sense of the word. He and Groves made an odd pair. Opie, as he was nicknamed, wore his eccentric pork pie hat and smoked a pipe, while blustering, overbearing Groves wore his military fatigues. Despite Army intelligence, who were looking for communists, there were two spies at Los Alamos, Fuchs and Hall, neither of whom was aware the other was a spy. Both were motivated by altruism as opposed to money, attempting to share their knowledge with the West's ostensible allies, the Soviets. Hall, who was 19 years old at the time, passed on his information by taking a train from Los Alamos to New York City and walking into the Soviet trade office in broad daylight, proving yet again the reality that security is an expensive and futile charade. With the Nazis nearing defeat at the end of 1944, the scientists in the project began to raise questions about its continued need and its future implications. Oppenheimer reacted defensively. "You'll get in trouble with security," he warned. With the collapse of his original rationale for building the bomb to defeat the Nazis, Oppenheimer began to desperately advocate a list of convoluted rationalizations for the need to continue. These range from the position that scientists shouldn't have a greater say than anyone else to the fantastic idea that the bomb was really for peace.